Well, let's just start with our discussion on the Flask. Well, in the last video, we actually started our first Flask API and even performed some addition using the post request. And this is how the code basically look like. But real APIs don't just accept JSON. They also take the values from URLs, query parameters, and must return proper HTTP responses. And that's exactly what we are going to see today. Today we are going to see how real backend APIs actually communicate, right? So just a quick revision of what we saw, previously. So previously we started with a Flask, right? We wrote a simple GET request. We wrote a POST request as well, which means we created this POST request API called as a slash API slash add, and we wrote a function like an add number function, and then we kind of started receiving the information in the JSON, and then did all the calculations, returned back the data as well. But what if the data comes from URL instead of a body? Because in this situation, we send the data in the form of in the body itself, right? But there are a lot of times when the data comes from the parameters as well. For example, you might have observed that the URLs are something like xyz.com slash product, right, slash some number, let's say 55 or something, or maybe slash user slash probably the name of the user like Prashant, right, or slash orders slash the order ID, right, let's say right, something xyz, right. And this is where the data is coming not from the body but actually coming from the URL parameter as well. So look into the part when how do we handle these kind of situation when these parameters are basically dynamic. We call it as a dynamic routes. So let's go ahead and build up something on the other front. We'll start building up another set of the code which is about slash app, and we'll make it a get request. Okay, so we'll have this slash users user, and I'll just name it, like I'll just call it as a name, so that I'm getting a value in the form of I mean it's just a name. If someone has entered anything, this is going to be a variable called as a name, and then I'm going to call it as a function like, hey, this is going to be my greet user function, right? I'm just going to greet the user, and we'll pass this specific value over here, which is name. So it automatically extract the variable from the URL, and then I can just simply start returning the value. For example, hey, I want to return the value in the form of a JSON, so you can write, hey, okay, this is an f string. This is a common thing that how we use uh, you know this is like an f string which we commonly use in Python. If you want to display any variable or want to print any variable inside of Python, so there are multiple ways. One is an f string. The other easiest way, which a lot of people basically do, is like type down the hello, right, whatever you want to type, right, specify, and then you can also do an addition on top of it, which means you can just directly put the name. This way, like you can also do a concatenation, and a simple concatenation can work. Personally, I like this way. I mean, it's pretty clean, easy to understand when I'm basically embedding the content. So for me, this basically works, right? Okay, so in order to test this, I'll flash up my uh, postman, and I'll just open my postman request. We'll make a you know request to this account. So this time I'm just not going to make it to add, but this time it's going to be slash user, and I have to pass out a name to this. So this is going to be my slash user slash let's say Prashant, and I'm going to send a get request, right? So you send a get request. Okay, my bad, because the application has not started yet. So I'm going to run an application. Okay, so my application is running now, and I then make a send request. So you can see, like, it says hello Prashant, right? So if I say, like, hello Nitin, right? So it says hello Nitin. You know, any value that you specify, it basically comes down. So this is a very simple way of having a dynamic URL. Similarly, if you want to basically do a lot of things, so for example, let's say I want to take some value as a number, right? And I specifically want this to be a number and nothing else. So how do I do that? Let's create another one, like a get request, and this time let's say, like, hey, I want to create a square of a number. So I take a number, right, and I take a square of a number. Now, by default, when we actually run through this, what the problem would be that this is going to cause you a problem, which means it's going to be a string by default. So we need to do a type, conversion, right? Now, type conversion, for people who don't know, type conversion is converting from one data types to the other data type. So if we want to convert from a string to an integer, right, we make sure that, hey, it's supposed to be an integer. Technically, we pass on through an int function altogether. This is something which is a very native to Python, right? So what we do over here is, like, we do a type conversion in the route as well, and that is pretty much simple. So you just write an int, right, and now it becomes an integer. So now all you just have to do is write def square, right, pass on the number, which is going to be a number, right, and then return the just okay, so the same thing, just on a phi, right, that, and let's say square. Okay, and we do this calculations of this number, which is number into number, right? Okay, so if all works fine, which means if I just run through a square and specify a number, it should automatically work, right? So let's say I specify a square and I specify a number, let's say 5. So I should be getting an square of 5, which is 25 in general, right? So this is a general idea. But let's try out with Prashant. What happens, right? If you type out with the Prashant, it says, hey, the requested URL was not found. If you enter the URL manually, try spelling or something, right? So it kind of gave you a error, for that matter, right? Because here at this point, the number, when you specify an int, it kinds of forces you to become a integer. If it's not an integer, it just rejects any value before it reaches to your function as well. So that's very important about the parameters. So this is called as a URL parameter. So like in both the example that we saw across is something that we saw across with an URL parameter. However, let's see, like, what are the other parameters which is also available, for us. So on the other parameter which is kind of available to us is basically around the something called as the query parameters, right? So look forward to the query parameters. Now if I do something such, Flask, let's say I search for a Flask. Now if you closely notice, and I'll just remove these parameters at the end, right? If you closely notice, what has specified here is it looked for a search, like it passed on this question mark, then specified a q, and then it basically searched for me. So now if I do some other search, let's say instead of Flask, I search for an SQL, you see the SQL is basically posting it out, right? Now this is something called as a query parameter. Okay, so previously we saw with an URL parameters, this is something called as a query parameters. Let's look into how these query parameters can be built across in our application. So this time I'll just going to write the same thing, which is going to be a search parameter. Let's say so search, right, it's a get request. So make a search request, def search. Okay, now here what I'm going to do is, first of all, you specify, let's say I want to look for a specific search name, right? So how do you work it on with that is that you extract the name of a name from the request. So request dot args, right, dot get, and then you specify the name. Now I'm just going to return this as of now, right? Okay, sorry, my bad. Okay, so I'm just going to return the name, hi, and this is going to be the name, right? So I return a name through it, right? And then remember I just made a request, so it's going to be a search, and then probably after the search it's going to do a query for it, right? Which means that the moment I hit something like this, like for example this is going to be my search now, search, and this time I'm going to make search name equal to Prashant, right? So it says, hey, hi Prashant, right? So it's a Nitin, right? Hi Nitin. Anything that you want to do it across, it will basically do. Now similarly, if you want to make a something similar like what was there in the Google, which means it had this queue parameter in there, right? So all just have to do is just specify a queue here, right? That's it. It doesn't matter. I mean, it's a variable name anyway, so the rest of the thing doesn't matter. We can specify a queue parameter, and now if you just specify a queue, you can write on all the logic. So which means you're literally getting the value over here, and then you can have it. So similarly, I'll just name it back as a name. But let's say I want to get max, multiple values. So if you have observed in the previous example, I basically trimmed down certain value on top of it, right? Let's look another again an example. So if you look into it, it did had a SQL here, right? But at the same time, it also had something more, like after and ampersand, it had some RLG, some values, right? Again, an ampersand and some other values. So you see, like multiple values are being, passed to it. And the idea is through an ampersand symbol, right? So let's try to do the same thing, right? And but in our situation, we'll make it like a multiple thing. So for example, apart from name, I also want to fetch the age, right? So rage request dot args, and I'm going to fetch the parameter age here, right? Hi, your age is, and you can just write down age. Okay, so we made these changes, small changes on the age. Now how my endpoint is going to look like would be name, obviously because of the name parameter sitting down here. Next is going to be an age. Now best part is I can just write any name, right? You write an ampersand and then you specify age, my bad, ampersand and age, and you can see automatically this query has been taken care of. Okay, so let's say like 30. Okay, and then you push this up, right? So hi Prashant, your age is 30. So this way your request has been done. Like you send your request in the form of this. So this is like how the query parameters work. So previously we saw an example with an URL parameters. This is an example from the query parameters. So URL parameters and query parameters are the two ways that you can send the information apart from a body. So three ways that we already saw on how we are basically sending it up, right? Okay, so yeah, that's about sending the parameters. In the next video we'll kind of see about how a proper https status code looks like, right? The real behavior of an API, right? That's what we are going to look into the next video, along with some error handling concept, right? How do we handle the error, and then post that we'll start building up some actual codes altogether, right? So that's all for this video. Thanks a lot for watching. See you in the next video. Bye bye.